So welcome everyone to our Food for Thought speaker series. Today we're honored to have a close colleague of ours, Adam Stepan, who's PhD and is the head of the Picker Center Digital Education Group. And he'll be discussing the new Connected University. Thank you, Adam, for joining us. It's great to see you. And thank you everyone who's joined us virtually. As always, please keep yourself on mute. You can put questions in the chat and or raise your hand to ask questions later on during the session. So now I'll hand it over to Bill for the introduction.
Thank you, Jeremy. And as I always begin, thank you to Jeremy and Valerie for keeping this this forum alive. We started in the height of the COVID winter of 2020, and we've been here most weeks over the last now going on 3 years. And I think most of you probably did already visit the Food for Thought website, but do it again and encourage your colleagues to do so. There's now dozens of great sessions that we've archived and stay alive. And we literally have had thousands of visitors to the site checking out previous sessions. And I'm sure that today's session is going to be checked out many, many times as we go forward. I want to preserve most of the time for Adam. I'll introduce him briefly, but just a couple of things on the ground rules. As soon as I finish, I'll turn it over to Adam. He's in charge of it from then on. You can certainly put questions in the chat. If you raise your hand, he may or may not call on you, but hopefully he will finish before 1 p.m., which is our hard stop. It's over at 1 no matter what, even in mid-sentence. So hopefully before 1, his formal remarks will be completed and he'll open it up for questions. Adam is just an incredible person and someone who I've been friends with for many years. He does run and really created our video case study program, which is video and written case studies. And again, if you go to the SEPA case collection online, you'll see there are I don't know, it's got to be approaching 36 cases now, most of whom have a video component. It's some of the best stuff you'll find in the world, and I use it for my classes and many other professors do as well, but even for the general intellectual audience who wants to see what's going on in Congo or Afghanistan or almost any place around the world, the United States, New York City, there's something in that library for you, and Adam's been the driving force behind that. He also is enabling professionals and students and faculty all over the world to use video to create a more positive, accessible, affordable learning environment. And so he'll probably talk a little bit about that today. His remarks today are encapsulated in the book that he and I and Suleiman Karachi, who is the provost of, or vice provost of Columbia, hope will be on the market later this year, dubbed Beyond Zoom, the Connected University or something like that. So I'm sure Adam's going to talk about that as well. He's won PBS awards and Emmy Awards for his films as an independent filmmaker, director, cameraman on things like affirmative action in Brazil. He's also done some pretty wild stuff about aliens and people from outer space landing in the jungles of Brazil and National Geographic type stuff as well. So he's a well-rounded person. He's Phi Beta Kappa from Brown, and he earned his doctoral degree from Oxford, I believe. Is that right, Adam?
King's College, London.
College. I was close. Same country. So we're honored to have him with us today. Adam, thank you so much. And I'll turn the program over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Bill and Jeremy and Val. Thank you, all colleagues, for inviting me. It's fantastic to be here. And this series of talks really is an important thing. As Bill mentioned, it started in the middle of the hardest moment of the pandemic when people were really trying to figure out how they could connect. And obviously we're dedicated to digital learning and using these tools to make new connections. And so this is a real example of how to do that. So I'm thrilled to have a chance to talk. I'll be talking today, as Bill mentioned, and thank you very kindly for the introduction, about a new book and some research we're doing, a book about basically how universities have responded to the pandemic and what are some of the potential paths going forward. So we at Columbia have been working for 8 years looking at how to use video and other tools. As Bill mentioned, before I got into working with universities and online education, I did documentary film and television. And so we really looking at how we could use those tools to further learning. And we've been doing that mostly on campus at Columbia or with our partners in other countries. And then obviously with the pandemic, it opened up a huge new areas. So I'm going to I have a little presentation I'm going to share about some of the things that have been happening in the pandemic and maybe some of the things that we'll see going forward. So we're talking about the new connected university because we really do see this moment being one of new sorts of connections happening between students, and as you'll see a bit, also between universities, and are sort of rethinking about what it means to teach, what it means to learn, and the ways we deliver things. So I'm going to go a little bit about talk about emergency remote learning, i.e. the initial response that most universities had to the pandemic, which was to move to Zoom teaching very quickly, and then talk a bit more about some other aspects of it and how the industry has reacted and some new paths forward. So obviously, we're all pretty familiar with seeing graphs perhaps like this. Basically, until the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic hit in March of 2020, the vast majority of courses were happening face-to-face and what we call regular delivery in this quote. And then suddenly between, the beginning of March and by the end of March, it had gone overnight to fully online. And the sort of online that enabled was what people now understand as sort of emergency. It's Zoom teaching, it's Zoom university. It's not the sort of teaching that we feel online education should be and will be going forward, which is to mix live sessions, Zoom sessions like this, with pre-recorded content, with planned activities. It was really emergency reaction. And so what we're talking about, looking a bit is in a future where we don't necessarily have to be online, but we choose to be online. How should we do that? And what are some of the benefits of doing that? And what's best done online and what's best done in person? And some of the negative feedback that people from surveys after this period of emergency remote learning is that in some ways, a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of Zoom University wasn't very good. In one poll, 75% of the students weren't very pleased with the education they got in that period. And then 51% of the professors found it less effective. But this was contrasted a bit with much more positive feedback on classes that have been designed and planned from the get-go to be online. Now, however, there was some positive outcome in terms of long-term prospects for this. It did introduce, despite the limitations, a lot of people to using digital tools, and a lot of students would want to keep some of the flexibility. People have gotten used to in work and in learning, having the flexibility to teach or to study when they can, have it work around other things. And I think that it's hard to go back from that. That's a real conquest that people want to continue to have. And there was also a lot of feeling that the tools allowed for learners who didn't normally have a chance to learn to connect. And there was a certain level of the playing field that happened. It was also a time when there's huge investments in technology. So there was a lot of money realizing that this is not a short-term trend. There's a lot of money being put into different online education companies and firms. Groups like Coursera, who's a MOOC provider, did their IPO during the pandemic. 2U, which is a company that helps universities put classes online, also received a lot of funding, made a major purchase of another MOOC provider, edX, which had been a nonprofit during this time. So there's lots and lots of resources being marshaled into the long-term prospects of having this blended mixture of face-to-face and online into the future. And I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how that's going to work and putting a lot of resources in it. There's also companies like Outlier. Outlier is a company that basically offers credit for college classes, basically filming them with at a very high production levels. And it's sort of a universal credit that can be applied to different degrees. So if you're transferring from one school to another, you can take certain courses on their platform and get credit from the University of Pittsburgh. And it's exciting because it for those courses that are kind of bedrock courses that you have to take in a lot of courses, basic intro to pre-calculus or basic statistics, I think there's a feeling that those things will become things that can be done 100% online, self-paced, and can allow you to spend more of your tuition dollars and your time on more specialized courses later on. So that's another trend that we're seeing. There's also some new, very exciting tools that are emerging that are taking what the basics of Zoom does, but delivering it in a much more effective way. We're doing this call on Zoom, but there's other tools like Engagely that really launched during the pandemic and saying there is going to be a future of live interaction like a Zoom call, but let's really design something from the ground up that allows people to interact online, share content, and have discussions. And I think more and more you're going to see the development of these tools happening so that a lot of the limitations we find in some of these platforms are going to feel, I'm sure that when we look at these tools in 4 or 5 years, it's going to be, almost, of course, you could do that. Just like in many other things that we do online now with digital tools, like getting a cab on Uber or renting something, 5-10 years ago, you couldn't imagine that being possible. It will become very commonplace. Another thing that happened during the pandemic that I think will kind of set the groundwork for things going forward is the fact that a lot of schools at K-12 and high schools and universities invested, in the middle of the pandemic in putting cameras and other technology into classrooms. This was done at a time when people were trying to figure out if, would students be able to come back to campus? Would they come back to campus partially? So this investment allowed what's called high flex teaching. And you can see a photo of it there where you have some students are in class in person, others are remote. It's not easy. It has a whole set of extra burdens on professors, but it does have a lot of benefits, especially for students who can't make it necessary to class in person, and also allows for students who are working, who are remote, who have to be, nowadays a lot of, you might want to be doing a degree and get transferred, and suddenly you're moving to California or Europe or South America. It would allow you to continue your education in new ways, and it also allows expert lecturers and guest speakers to come in from different locations. And so this infrastructure is now in place. It was a massive investment. Columbia spent a lot of money, and we at SEPA wired pretty much the majority of our classrooms. And the real question is whether now that physical infrastructure is going to be leveraged in new ways and built into the curriculum. Is bringing in a lot of classes, of course, are practical. You want to hear from an expert who is involved in the thing that you're studying. And obviously, Columbia being in New York, it's traditionally been a little easier for us than universities that might be in a rural location to have an expert come in and talk to the class. But it's still not easy. You have to find that person, get on their schedule during their business trip to New York City. But now with Zoom and with this technology that we have in a lot of the classrooms, that person could just beam in and connect. And that's been true for us at Columbia, and it's true for universities all around the world. And I think it's created a very new moment where the idea that you can connect and bring in experts and connect your studies in the classroom to real world problems suddenly becomes something that's very possible, very viable, and that people have come to expect. So that's an exciting beginning of connected learning that will come out of the pandemic. There's another thing that I think that's happened over the last 10 years or so, 15 years, that the pandemic, I think, hopefully will accelerate, which is this move towards active learning. it's pretty much been emerged in the research on teaching and learning that people really learn by doing. And this might be, a middle schooler or someone in elementary school, but it's also true if you're at a university or in a graduate school program. And that you can learn the theoretical concepts, you can learn these and absorb these in a lecture, which could be a pre-recorded lecture or a lecture given in class, or by reading, but by really doing and using those concepts and applying them to an actual concrete problem, and having to deal with often working in a group, for example, to try to really think through the various steps of that problem. That's when the brain really hardwires knowledge. That's when people really come out with long-term understanding, long-term expertise in a certain area. And this is in higher education, it's something that's sort of slowly happened in various disciplines. Professor Emick, I think, is a kind of leader in public management, in that he's always in his classes brings in experts, has always used case studies. They were written case studies before, now they're video case studies, but he's always, I think, in his teaching has grounded the theoretical part of what he teaches in practical examples and also exercises. I think a lot of times in Bill's classes, students play the role of policymakers or policy advisors, and they have debates or they have to write policy papers. And this has also happened in other areas. And it's actually interesting, one of the areas that really led this move to active learning was actually physics. And this is the photo here of Eric Mazur from Harvard, who kind of started this whole project because he realized that people were really having a hard time grasping some of the key concepts in his physics class just by the theory, and only by creating practical hands-on experiments and examples that they designed and that let students do, were people able to grasp some complex concepts in physics. And so after about 5 or 10 years of his innovation, it's pretty much, that's the way physics is taught around the world. Active learning. You're going to get your lectures, but you're also going to be doing a series of hands-on experiments and workshops. And in a funny way, when you think about online education, most people wouldn't think about active learning. You think of online education, you think of maybe something that's passive. Maybe you're in a Zoom call, maybe you're watching a recorded video. But actually, if done well, online education can really be the natural partner for active learning, because you could give people recorded lectures or a digital case study, for example, that they might watch or work with offline, and then use the time that you're together, be it in person or online in a Zoom call, to actually do projects, to do presentations, to do work together, to do collective research. So this connection of using digital tools to make learning more active has been around a while, but I think we do feel that with the pandemic, it's going to accelerate. So what is the new connected university? What might this university of the future look like if it builds on some of these trends? Well, ideally, one aspect of it will be that it will connect to new types of learners, that more learners who the division that you've traditionally had between the on-campus students and the online students is sort of blurring. A lot more universities are offering classes where you could take some classes online and some in person. And so it allows, I think, for a much more diverse group of students, which I think will improve classroom debate. I know that the EMPA program that we run always benefits hugely from having so many students who have work experience, who are older, who bring all that to the classroom, what it's like to actually be, working in this area. I think the new connected university will also, we hope, enable active learning. And that's some of the investments in ed tech that we showed before. We feel that by marshaling some funds, hopefully universities like ours or others can create more and better assets that can be used in active learning. And together with this is an emphasis on what we call, on real issues. I think universities for a while have been talking about the need to connect to real world problems. Obviously, universities have always done practical research on problems, be it climate change or energy or, a whole variety of issues. Obviously that's been part of the mission, is to give back knowledge to the world. But I think that active learning and digital education allows that to happen on a new level. You can really bring into the classroom problems that are happening now, solutions that are being developed in different parts of the world. It might be a solution developed in Mumbai, India, or Sao Paulo, Brazil. It can be brought in the classroom in a new way, and people can see those connections. And I think finally, the other part, apart from active learning, another thing that people really find is really important for knowledge to really serve in is social learning, is connecting with your peers. And again, this is an area where on one hand, people say, well, with the pandemic and with digital tools, there's a whole social aspect of being at the university, which was lost. And that's true. We recognize that. People missed being able to hang out and bump into each other in the hallway, or meet easily physically as a group after class and do an assignment. On the other hand, a lot of the tools that there's been a lot of tools for online education that have always been there that universities haven't used. The learning management systems we use, like Canvas, has a lot of built-in tools for discussions and group projects. And I think in general, we're seeing that the pandemic has opened people's minds to that. Professors are more likely to use a discussion board, use the social learning aspects of these different platforms. And I think that there's new types of communication. I think most of us, nowadays use some sort of, social media. It's Twitter, it's Facebook, or it's LinkedIn or Instagram, depending on who you are and how old you are and what your style is. But I think people understand that there is a social aspect to digital tools. It can enable new types of connections, to text people, to write emails. And previously, that hadn't been connecting so much to the university life. That had been how we live our life socially outside of classroom. But in the classroom, before the pandemic, a lot of it was very much the same way it had been in the 19th century. It was books and sitting down physically in a classroom and delivering presentations. So I think that this digital aspect of communication and connecting with peers and peer-to-peer learning is something that will be part of the new connected university going forward. And some tools for connected learning, obviously case studies, Bill mentioned very nicely our collection. These are things that we've been working on for about 8 years. And these are basically video documentaries. I think, those of you who are students in the program who are on the talk today might be familiar with them. They're documentary films that look into a specific issue connected with a written case. And we've been doing some work that we're very excited about with the Open Society University Network, and helping a group of students create new cases around the world. So these are students in the various places where the Open Society has partner universities that include places like Berlin and Palestine and Vienna and Bangladesh and Kyrgyzstan. And so it's a very diverse group of people. There include refugees in Kenya. And what we are doing is we're putting online both classes and also tools for students to create cases themselves. And so we see this as sort of a virtuous cycle where students could create content about things they're studying, and other students could then use those. And that's something that we've been working very hard to enable. Another tool that sort of became popular and known during the pandemic is this question of flipped class video. So let's use the time where a lecture might be recorded and watched before the class, and during the class time, it leaves more time for discussion, which I plan to do in a second myself to model that behavior. And so that's another thing that we've been trying to enable to help a lot of professors create videos across this network of Open Society. And it's a way for students who are different time zones get to know each other, get to know different professors in an efficient way. And there's also some other exciting tools that we're playing around with, which I'll just mention briefly. And these are all things to say, how can you do online interaction and learning and make it more exciting, make it more rewarding? One tool is Padlet, which is basically kind of a team brainstorming tool where people can in real time put up ideas and share images and text. Perusal is a fantastic tool that allows for annotation of text in the group. So we share a document and people can share notes. And There's also some other, Minerva has a great tool that's very, you can see a photo of below, which is a very exciting alternative to Zoom, which sort of combines some of these things. So you can see people and very easily share documents in a way that's a bit more agile than perhaps we're able to do right now with Zoom. And with the Open Society, we're using a lot of these tools in network classes, in classes that meet in various places where some of the time the students meet in person locally, and other times they meet and share projects. And I think we've been doing a lot of thinking about what part of this is best done locally, what's best done in the small, intimate conversation with people together in the room, and what part where do you really gain a lot from hearing different perspectives. So those are some of the things that we're doing. Another thing that I'll point out that's exciting to look at is, during the pandemic, there was this explosion of tools designed at kind of big numbers, like sharing a class to hundreds of students. But I think there's also a real understanding that this idea of peer-to-peer learning in small groups online, maybe connecting with people who have an interest in a very specific area. There's people who really understand how useful that is. That's what we're doing here in a way. We're together, we're going to have a conversation about these issues. And having intimate, smaller groups that meet online, there's a couple platforms that really help do this in an interesting way. One is Maven, that offers these courses that are limited. They have a certain expert in the field who basically runs a course for about 4 weeks. It offers a certificate, but it's very much based on creating a network of peers and helping each other learn together. And then Section 4 does a similar thing in business area. And part of the appeal of the course is that it's very small and it has a lot of online interaction of the group, and also uses some pre-recorded content and a lot of live discussion. So that's a little bit of a review of some of the things that are happening out there. And in terms of moving forward, I think one of the things that we should look at is, together with these tools I've described, active learning, peer-to-peer, shorter courses, I think also there's a move in industry to say, obviously, we're interested in people who have degrees. A degree from Columbia is still a very important thing. But I think more and more people are also employers are opening to acknowledging and accepting shorter certificate programs, which is exciting because it allows people like us at Columbia to take some of the content that we might have in one of Bill's courses, for example, and also share it in a smaller package, which for people who are working, they might find very useful, and they can get a certificate that would show that, okay, I didn't have a chance to do the full 2-year program at SEPA, but I was able to take a few courses or short courses and gain some knowledge about a specific area like public-private partnerships, or how to structure, initiatives in a specific area of healthcare or security. And so that's an interesting trend to keep an eye on, that to see how the business side of this and the job market is starting to acknowledge and respond to some of these new shorter certificates. And then for other potential connections for the Connected University, I think that for all the reasons I've gone over, the making content that can be used in multiple ways is something that really makes sense. If you're going to be trying to teach longer classes and shorter classes and offering them to a wide variety of people, having some things like case studies or some very well-produced and useful pre-recorded content that could be then used and discussed is going to be something that's going to be more and more valued. And new types of classes. I think a lot of universities experimented with new schedules during the pandemic to reduce the number of students. People realize that there are other ways. We don't have to be necessarily stuck on the 2-semester model. There's other forms of stacking education. And I think in general, universities are also going to connect to the idea that their mission, universities have always acknowledged they have a mission to the world. I think more and more universities are going to say that one way that they can fulfill that mission is to create content that they can share with new audiences. So those are a few takeaways. I wanted to stop and have a chance to listen and discuss some of these issues, but these are some of the observations that Bill and I and others have had looking at the last couple of years of the pandemic and looking at how it interacts with this history of innovation and digital education. So thank you very much for that. I'd love to hear from people And I'm just having a chance to look now in the chat. And I think, Bowden, you had a question. Maybe if you'd want to share this a little bit, it would be great to discuss it.
Thank you so much. This is amazing. You know, I just learned about this conference about an hour ago. And I just, and I go to these Zoom conferences all the time. I'm actually of Ukrainian origin. I'm a Columbia College alumnus. I had a Ukrainian program on WKCR in the 1960s. But I'm a clinical immunologist, and I'm interested in pandemics. And I'm actually writing a book on how New York City incubated AIDS from 1970 to 1981 and spread it around the world. And so this pandemic was a remarkably interesting event for me. And I'm sorry if I'm taking up so much time, but I can't, but you know, I am the mentor. I am a mentor, a very important member of the brains, energy, marketing, and financing of the Russian Sputnik 5 COVID vaccine. And he is a Stanford and Harvard Business School graduate. And he was considered to be the linchpin, the connection between President Trump and President Putin during the Russiagate scandal. And his parents were biologists. But I spent 2021 trying to solve the vaccine problem for Ukraine. But I failed because I put my money on a thing called CVN-CoV, which was a mRNA German vaccine that didn't pass through the phase 3 trials. It's an mRNA vaccine. It's the grandfather of all mRNA companies in the world. But I came up with an idea on how to develop a vaccine for the next pandemic, and it's remarkably easy because I've been online since 1920. I've been running a town. I've actually had 61 kids enter American colleges on full scholarships, all from Ukraine. And I've had kids at Harvard, I've had kids everywhere. And I started this before internet. So in the 1992. So I'm very facile with this, and I know how to crash in on Zoom conferences like this. And it's a very simple strategy, and Columbia would be a wonderful place. And I have found a place to get seed money for it. And I would love to talk about it, and I don't want to take up one more time, but I'm not going to disappoint. You know, Columbia has Vincent Racaniello. I don't know if anybody knows who Vincent Racaniello is. Does anybody here know who he is? He's a virologist, and he started podcasting on viruses in 2008. And he is one of these people who has been a leader in this. And I've listened to hundreds of his podcasts because I've used it for the research for my book, because I supplement it with my reading. And Peter, I don't know if you know who Peter Daszak is. You don't know who Peter Daszak is, but he actually is an Englishman. He's a British Ukrainian of all things, but he's based in New York City, and he is the virus hunter of the world. And he, you know, when Donald Trump attacked him, 77 Nobel Prize winners came out in his support. And he was responsible for covering up for the Wuhan laboratory. But he's based in New York. He runs a global network of searching for viruses out of someplace around Penn Station.
I'm sorry. I think
you have to go. I know, so I could talk about this, but if people are interested, I would love to talk about this.
Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone else has a question. I have one for you, Adam. I think one of the things that I saw in your presentation, I think is a very great overall description of what it's looking like, what the outlook is, and the expectations for the future, which is a bright one. Is what we hear from faculty here is the logistics of having hybrid. So faculty get the training, but it seems like if you're not in that space all the time, you have a lot of challenges, and there's a lot of logistics support required behind that. So I was curious to know from you, what would that look like? How do we make sure that there's a culture around it from the get-go?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that bottom line is universities were set up to do something That's very different. Most professors became professors because they love to read, they love to research, they like to teach in person. They don't necessarily want to deal with technology, with cameras and video and all this stuff. And so on the other hand, from a student's perspective, if these things can be, if these efforts could be marshaled and compensated and happen, it seems to improve learning outcomes. It seems to be that it's a complex thing where I think that a lot of times, universities are unusual organizations. They're quite unique in that they're huge. They're managed by faculty and they're designed on very old models. There's a lot to be admired about how universities are set up and run, but they were set up and run a long time ago too, and they haven't changed as much perhaps as the other aspects of life have. So I think that it's something where it really requires strong leadership. I think that you cannot ask professors to spend their summers doing hard work preparing digital tools for a fall class and not compensate them for that work. If that's a time that professors need to do their research, to publish their articles, to finish their books. It's a precious time for them. And so I think university leadership has to really acknowledge these challenges and say, and really make that calculation saying, okay, there's a real value in delivering this sort of experience for our students. We have students, we want to have a more diverse student body. We want to allow students this flexibility. Now, the question is, what do we need to do to be able to do that? Are there professors who are willing and able to do this, to create these resources? Can we marshal the resources needed to compensate them for that time? So I think that's a thing. I think the good news is that most universities are actually, looked at the pandemic as a moment of, financial disaster, but remote education allowed universities to continue to operate. Enrollment decreased a little bit, but much less than people feared. People thought there was going to be a major financial crisis at most universities. But in fact, that's not the case. And also, strangely enough, the stock market boomed during the pandemic. And most universities, a lot of private universities, have huge endowments. So in fact, a lot of universities are financially coming out of this pandemic in a much stronger position than they were 2 years ago. So it's sort of an unusual moment where I think there's a very clear need, and a lot of universities actually have the resources and also maybe the political capital. It's a moment, if we can use it. I mean, there's, Bill often quotes us, you don't want to let any crisis go you want to make sure you use the crisis to change things. So it's hard to change things. So I think that, the bottom line is, and that's why it's been very exciting, our work with the Open Society University Network, because it is a new network. It's got some central funding to help a bunch of universities, and their mission is very much to share between campuses. So it's been exciting and fun to be part of the team, as a consultant and as a professor in the program to help think about new models. So I think, it's certainly not fair to professors to ask them to do a lot more work on top of the existing work. The structure has to be put in place, but it's something that I think is maybe it's worth it for the universities and would have a lot of benefits for different types of students. And I think it would also have a lot of benefits for universities in terms of their mission. If you have a fantastic professor, an expert in some area, and you're able to capture some of their thinking and the things they offer in their class and make it available, to more people, there's a real value in that. So
just to follow up on that, in terms of, you said the culture of leadership, that we need good leadership. I guess another question based on that leadership question is, what's the selling point for leadership? Like, in your experience, what has been the most convincing argument for university leadership? Because we'd say during COVID, we need to do this because of COVID, because we have students in quarantine, to respect social distancing, Students have left and moved back home or gone to other countries. So at this point, what's that selling point for leadership?
Well, it's another very good and tough question, Jeremy. But I think that, what we as part of our book, we did about 50 interviews with different university leaders. And it was funny because people often said, if you want faculty to not do something, or you want something, just nothing like saying that the top leadership demands it to get a negative answer. But when students want something, that's something I think professors, are close to students. Professors became professors because they want to make sure that the student, and I think you are getting is a real groundswell of students who say, hey, I really appreciated that flexibility. It was important to me to be able to take some classes online, or maybe I have a disability, or maybe it's to have some, simply the act of simply recording lectures to allow them to be watched later on. Apparently, I think 30,000 students or some number at University of Washington signed a petition to say that this is something that universities did for every lecture during the pandemic. And now it's a right. It's something that we have a right as students to have. It helps us in our studies. We can repeat, we can review them. So I think that's, I think it's going to be, it's also, it's going to take leadership, but it's also going to take listening to, I think that there's going to be, a need to listen to students. And I think students want some of this. They don't want it done badly. They want it done well. And I think it's not, it's not to say that, there's not a huge place for face-to-face classes. There's something very magical and very special about being in a small seminar and being together. But there's also something very magical and very, very interesting to connect with people you wouldn't normally connect with, or to have the flexibility. So I think that's, that's going to be some of the key issues. And I think it's also going to be, by leadership by example. I think some of those universities that are taking a leadership role in this are going to see a lot of success, increased enrollments. There's going to be that kind of pressure. So we shall see.
Really, really fantastic. And I know I'm posing the tough questions.
No,
go ahead.
No, any other questions about online learning or some of the issues that we touched upon? Would anyone else like to share?
You have a few minutes left. Can I ask you another one?
Please.
In case someone else doesn't. I think one of the aspects personally, working in education, especially after Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, was the question of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the arguments that you mentioned in your presentation, which I'm glad was there, was you get to meet students who wouldn't normally have the opportunity to participate in these kinds of programs. And I was wondering, in your discussions with leadership, was that, did that come up at all? Speaking about how we bring students from around the world and give them the opportunity to join, because it's expensive to move to a different city. And if you're an international student, much more complicated with visas and other loops that you have to.
Yeah, no, it's I think again, it's complex because universities obviously depend on tuition. They depend, even though the university is a nonprofit, they depend on tuition. So that's I think that most universities are trying to balance they want to make sure that they don't because they're most in the United States, most universities don't get significant federal or state funds. I mean, many of them get a certain amount, but tuition is always a big part of the overall budget. On the other hand, there is a real desire to democratize and to open doors. And I think in terms of equity and inclusion, this whole digital experiment we've been on had a couple interesting things. Obviously, certain students who maybe didn't have good internet in their home or didn't have access to a good computer, obviously were, so had a lot of barriers. So there was a digital divide in a way. Some people who had great internet and a great computer and a quiet place to work or to study at their home, were able to transition to digital education in a way that people who might be living in a crowded apartment without good internet couldn't do. So there's that part of it. On the other hand, there was also a very interesting finding that On the other hand, there's also another group of students who weren't able to participate in regular classes as much because they're working, or maybe also because of, I think that there was also some interesting studies that showed that in some ways, by pushing things online, even in a face-to-face class, there's a tendency often for certain types of people to dominate. They stand up and they talk, and they kind of dominate the room because they're the people who traditionally are used to doing that. And I think that in many online classes, people who perhaps are less used to taking that role were able to lead things in a discussion or participate more. And so I think there was also a feeling that there was a sort of enabling and a leveling of the playing field for certain students who said, well, by the fact that the videos are now recorded and I can participate online, I feel much more empowered than I did before. So they're the two sides of it. And I think people are still figuring those out, but I think it's a real, I think that is part of the equation that leadership have to look at.
I just wanted to mention, by the way, I saw your Brazil in Black and White documentary years ago, and I didn't know that was you. I've known you for years, and it was a great documentary. So
thank you. Yeah, that was it was actually, in a funny way, that was a PBS film I made about higher education in Brazil, and it was one of the projects that actually got me an online education, Jeremy, because as part of that, we would take those films and we would chop them into smaller pieces for use in high schools. So if you're a high school student, there's a thing called PBS Learning Media, where if you're a teacher, you can go to all these Novas and wide angles and PBS films and use chunks of them. So as a producer, I had to create essentially almost like a digital case study. Apart from the film that was on television, we had to create this content, shorter written packages that they use in schools. And I love that process. And that actually got me thinking, this is back in 2006 and 2007, about this whole thing. I said, well, that was really interesting. And that was kind of that was a moment when a lot of things were happening in the space. So thank you. That's nice of you to mention that, Jeremy. I think we're almost to the end of our time. And I see that Mr. Bowden, you put your contact there. It's great. I think if people are interested in finding out more about do you have a question that's about online learning that you'd like to share?
Yes, actually, I attended a similar Zoom conference with Amazonia at Harvard. And Dr. Carlos Nobre, who's considered the kind of the overseer of Amazonia, said there's absolutely no science in Amazonia. And he's dreaming of creating an AIT. And that means an Amazonian Institute of Technology, because he's an MIT PhD. And in Amazonia, they use online education, and they've been using it for 10 or 15 years. Started with television, because there's no travel communication. If you take Manaus, they've got dirt roads that lead out of it. And so here's an opportunity to do this. And if you look, I checked at how many Harvard students there are from Amazonia. There's none. So they're all from Sao Paulo.
No, it's true. It's very true. And actually, we're doing a big project actually with Brazil, with the public sector in Brazil right now, where they're using a lot of the case studies and a lot of the film recording classes that we've done to replicate training of public sector employees. They have a fantastic Escola Nacional de Administração Pública, National Public Administration School, which has literally, I think, 1 million students. So just to show you how, investment in creating something can replicate, but they're doing it this right way. They're taking some of our content, repackaging it, repurposing it, but delivering it with local professors, making it have local context. So it's very exciting. Well, listen, I want to honor Jeremy and Bill and Val's instructions to keep on time and let everyone go on with their day. I really appreciate all of you for joining us. And again, Jeremy, Val, colleagues at SEPA, thank you so much for this generous invitation. I really appreciate it. And thank you for listening. I hope
Thanks so much, Adam. This has been really informative to just get to know your craft a little bit better. So selfishly, we really enjoyed the session too. I really enjoyed the session too. And it will be up in the next few days on our website, so you can check out and refer people back to it too.
Okay, well, fantastic. Well, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day. Best wishes to all. Thanks again for your time.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.